please join me in welcoming Bob Beecham.
Good morning, good morning. I was just chatting with Dr. Davenport backstage. He taught MIS at the University of Texas, and my wife received her degree in MIS from the University of Texas. That's where we met, and my degree was in my wife. It was he was a institution at the University of Texas while he was there, very well known. And while we were getting ready, I was texting back and forth with my wife if she remembered him. Good news is she did not, because he wasn't there yet. He didn't get there till '98. Now, Mary Fran, I've got news for you. In your opening comments, you mentioned that CIOs don't really like dealing with the CFOs. And if we can have this off the record, I've got a little secret for you. CEOs don't like dealing with CFOs. But we need adult supervision, don't we? We all need adult supervision, and that's where we get it usually. Now, you know, the real reality is that we spend a lot of time at events like this, and thank you, by the way, for putting on this spectacular event, talking about these big trends that are really going to affect us. Some of them are right in our face, some are a little farther out, some we really understand well, others you're still trying to figure out what you're going to do with it. But what we find, at least in my experience, years ago when I first heard the axiom, I have always believed it's true, that we as an industry tend to overestimate the impact of these technology shifts in the short term and grossly underestimate their impact in the long term. I'm sure you've all heard that expression. So I thought it'd be fun if we would just thought about the long term for a little while and spend a little time and a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I talk about the architecture, the enterprise architecture of 2026 and what's going to happen, because all these big trends, these small trends that are exciting, these big trends that are slow rollers, like we just heard from Dr. Davenport about how slow that roll was until now all of a sudden here it's on top of the world. These are the things that really are going to transform what we do, really going to transform our lives, not just our jobs as CIOs. So I picked 12 years. And the reason I picked 12 years is because I have bookends. I had just become CEO of BMC Software, and I was invited to be the speaker at this same conference in 2002. What you see there is a man scared to death. Think about what had just happened. Obviously, we had the tragedy with September 11th, but you had Enron's collapse, you had Sarbanes-Oxley, you had the whistleblowers, you had every board governance model that we'd ever dealt with was changing overnight. You were still waking up from the hangover of the Y2K spending binge that occurred, which, by the way, was a lot of fun. And if y'all ever want to do that again, let us know. But that was the last time that we just kind of had crazy, wild spending on IT. And when that fell, if you go back and look at the stock prices of the big, huge technology companies, none of them really have recovered from then. That was their peak. They've collapsed. That was coming off of that. And like a lot of companies, you got a new CEO about then, and they put Mikey in and see Mikey will eat anything and see what happens, and that was me. I was standing before this group, although if statistics are to be believed, there's not too many of you in here that were there in 2002, probably one or two people in between you. We were talking about the future, where IT was going. And I thought it would be helpful to kind of bookend this and talk about what we were worried about in 2002. What were the projections? What were the topics du jour that we were all going through together? And then kind of compare that to what really changed us. How many of them were right, and how many of them were new things or black swans that showed up? So let's use that framework for this discussion. This chart is a busy chart. I'm not going to go through it, but just very, very quickly. This was one of the documents that was being discussed in 2002. This was Gartner predicting top 10 predictions that would make an impact. This was taking over 200 predictions that Gartner put out and taking the top 10, and what were they? First, accelerated job loss and vendor consolidation. That tells you what was going on. It was a rough time. There was a lot of job loss, a lot of companies going out of business. There was a flight to safety. Those of us who were in CEO positions at that point were very focused on maintaining profitability and being healthy, because there were going to be a lot of companies go out of business, and a lot did go out of business. Second one, and again, talks about kind of the fear in the system at the time. It was safeguarding our people, our knowledge, our systems, and our nations. That was what was in the mindset at the time. Third one, consumers are going to go online. We got that one right. They did go online, did they not? And that one was one we talked about, and that was a trend we all discussed, and it happened. By the way, you see the word finally? That's actually what Gartner had written in there, finally. They'd been predicted to go online for some time. Budget squeeze. Now, I actually have a theory that budget squeeze is embedded in all PowerPoint templates related to IT, because I don't think I've ever seen a year where that wasn't somewhere in one of the presentations, except 99 again. But that particular one is always on the list. Outsourcing was a big talk. This was the big rush to India, and every board of directors was talking to every CIO about what's our India strategy. And I ran into more of you in the airport in Bangalore than I did in New York and in your offices, as everyone was running to India to discuss the outsourcing strategy. And by the way, that particular, there's another aspect of that. For those of you who recall it, there was a theory at that point in time that IBM Global Services and EDS were going to take us all over, and that we were going to all get out of having our own data centers. And in fact, there was this huge wave of outsourcing to those two big companies. I find it kind of an interesting analysis to think about that as it relates to our topics now around public cloud and the theories that were going on there. So something happened that took that theory from the conventional wisdom, we're all going to go to IBM Global Services, to no, we didn't. Not exactly sure how you can connect those dots, but it's worth thinking about. CRM took off, but at the time, Siebel and then Mark Benioff changed the industry, and everyone was very, very keen on getting CRM. ERP had been implemented just before this, and here comes the CRM wave, one that we're all still engaged in. IT infrastructure, a place that BMC has spent a lot of time, was, again, strategic because there was a shift change of the architectures that we had developed. We developed a mainframe, then we developed client-server, three-tiered architectures, and now here comes the web, and everything's going to be web service-based. How are we going to build out an infrastructure for that? So there was a real discussion around what is the optimal architectural design for IT infrastructure, something we still talk about all the time. I have a theory about that I'll share at the very end. 50% of mobile applications will be obsolete in the same year they are built. I'm sure this was the first time mobile applications had ever been presented in a presentation, because at that point, there were no mobile phones. That's a real problem. There were 14.7 million smartphones, flip phones basically, shipped in 2002. That's when they started, and they were all kind of this idea of some sort of a light browser, and can we run on top of the light browser? And that was the topic du jour. The point was, whatever you develop on a mobile platform, it's not going to work. It's going to be obsolete within a year, and we were right about that. The next one was web services will dominate deployment. That was the big thing. SOA and SOAP. If you remember that, that was what we were all excited about, and every one of us was trying to read what the heck is SOA and what the heck is SOAP, and do I have to understand it and deploy it, and who do I buy it from? And all the vendors came in and said, we have service-oriented architectures, and you need to buy something from us. And then fourth, application integration. We've got all these disparate systems. Another one, almost like budget squeeze, we're never going to get away from, is how do we get these systems to talk to each other? So this was the list that Gartner had put out that we were all talking about in 2002. There were other things, but these were the big items. So now let's talk about some of the things that we didn't really talk about in this phase, but that certainly made an impact. I use this photograph for the following reason. There are a few times in world history when a lot of pictures get taken of an event. The papal inauguration is always one of them. And this is John Paul II in 1978. The first broadcast quality digital camera came online in 1975. Digital photography. I will bet you there was not any digital cameras. In fact, obviously there wasn't, because Sony hadn't shipped the first consumer version until the early 80s. In this crowd, 1 million people, not a single. You see, actually, if you look at it, you can see flashes going off. People were I guess they think the light will bounce off the Pope and come back by the time the shutter closes. But this was 1978, John Paul II, no digital photography. You jump forward to 2005, and we start talking about Pope Benedict, and you see digital cameras. There they are, both video and handheld devices. What do you not see? You see no mobile phones. Now this, I know everybody knows it, and I knew it, but when I read it and was thinking about it, it just shocked me. The iPhone didn't ship until April of 2007. The iPad didn't ship until 2010. It feels like my whole life we've been talking about mobile, and we've been dealing with it, but they didn't ship until yesterday. And so now you jump ahead and you talk about Pope Francis, and this is the photograph of his inauguration. Every person in the crowd holding up a digital phone. And we, as CIOs, somehow went from, oh, that's cute, everybody has mobile phones, to it's our problem about that time. Bring your own device, yes. Bring your own IT, yes. Bring your own everything, it's our problem. And by the way, some of those photographs, as Eric Schmidt told me one time about YouTube, you really don't want those on your hard drives. Employees take weird pictures. This was a change that we weren't talking about in 2002. But I think, as much as anything, it's changed everything we've thought about and how we've designed our systems and processes. Software as a service. ADP had been out there. There were plenty of other applications. Mark Benioff, before 2002, had started Salesforce.com. And in fact, I had the pleasure of going on I was invited to a conference, a small conference of CEOs, and it was Mark and Diane Green at VMware, and a few other of us got to ski together, and I got to hear Mark talk about the cloud and software as a service. And I believed at that moment he was right. Something big was coming, but you didn't know how big and how fast, what was going to happen. The ASPs, we all remember ASPs, we talked about that. ASPs had kind of come and fall, what was going to happen with this space. But now, it says 70% of us use SaaS. I don't believe it. I think it's 100%, but I'm not going to argue with data. $46 billion market by 2017 as software service. BMC, by the way, we came out with our first IT service management SaaS offering about 3 years ago. We just blew past 1,000 customers. Triple-digit growth now for multiple quarters. Fastest growing product line in the portfolio is our SaaS offering for the Remedy SaaS family of products. Taken off. Pretty remarkable. Public cloud. 40% of us are using Azure. AWS, of course, is still King Kong by a large factor. Google is certainly talking it up. You see the price points coming down. Everyone here probably has a strategy for, I'm sure, let me not say probable, everyone here has a mobile first or a mobile strategy. Everyone here has a cloud strategy. And everyone here either has already deployed their strategy or educated their boards about their cloud strategy and where they're going to use public and private clouds and what percentage and which apps fit. But we weren't talking about this in 2002 when we were all sitting together prognosticating the future and thinking about how we were going to change our industry. And we definitely weren't talking about Mark Zuckerberg. He was 18 years old in 2002, and it was 2 years later before Face Mash had been written, and they started Facebook. It wasn't too many years later, I was sitting in a room, too many years ago, excuse me, I was sitting in a room with the chief marketing officer of I'll use the same carefully veiled analogy, of a really, really big shoe company that also makes other athletic wear. And the CMO was explaining to me how they use social media in real time to come out with a new product in a particular market segment, watch the social media, watch what happens with it, and they will shut the product down before you and I ever know the product existed, or they will ramp production and go for it fast. And they'll base it on what is now authoritative data. We're talking about Facebook and Twitter as authoritative data for important decisions being made in real time by the world's biggest company. You see LinkedIn, 313 million users, Twitter, 217 million, Chatter, 225,000 different enterprise networks using Chatter today. We weren't talking about this at all in 2002, and actually for many years after that, yet almost everybody here has got a social, mobile, and of course, analytical and cloud strategy, SMAC strategies. So the SMAC, social, mobile, analytic, and cloud, none of us were really talking about that much in 2002, but yet it's transformed the way we live, the way we work, all of our IT budgets, all of our IT, our board agendas, our innovation agendas, our business models of our businesses have all been changed by that pretty dramatically. Here's another one that's maybe a little less obvious. In 2013, HP's server volume dropped 15% year over year. They shipped 15% less servers in 2013. At the same time, Wistron and Quanta grew more than 30%. HP announced they outsourced the building of their hyperscale servers to Foxconn, who had been making all the Apple iPhones and iPads for years. 1.2 million people in one exit in Shenzhen. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. You make that exit, you turn left, you go to Foxconn, you go right, you go to Huawei. And there they are making all those devices, and now they're making HP's products. Yesterday, IBM cleared another regulatory hurdle to get permission to sell their low-end Wintel servers to Lenovo, exiting the market. So you see HP exiting the manufacturing, not exiting the business, exiting the market of manufacturing and building servers to Foxconn, as Apple had already done. Now Apple's actually moving manufacturing to other locations as well. And you see IBM simultaneously selling off a big chunk of their low-end Wintel business. That in 2002, by the way, Wintel was all the rage. Unix was going to die. Wintel was taking everything. These companies that are in that space are all going to make a ton of money, which they did for a long time, until the long-term trends began to kick. Now, Winstron and Quanta, today, two companies I would guess some of you, if not a lot of you, have not talked about, ship 1 in 7 servers shipped today are made by those two companies. White boxes, the Facebooks and the people of the world that build these giant, amazingly large data centers aren't buying them from the big traditional vendors. They are having them made to specifications. So the advent of white boxes, where's that going to go? How long is that going to continue? So really some disruptive questions involved in how, and our strategies and architecture designs. It used to be, if you went IBM and HP, you were safe. Winstron and Quanta are now growing at 30% and 1 in 7 servers. Interesting times. We weren't talking about that. In 2002, the big cybersecurity story of the year was 3 guys, I'm guessing in their mother's basement in their underwear, hacked in and stole $2.7 million worth of money out of 30,000 credit cards. That was the big cyber attack. You jump ahead to last year, and obviously our large retailer was hit, but none of us cast stones, because we all know the next day could be us. It could be any of us, right? That really galvanized the whole world and took what we already knew as an industry of how exposed and how big an impact this can be, and it showed it to the whole world with $110 million of direct cash lost and billions of dollars of market capitalization and productivity for companies all over the world lost in just that one. And of course, about once a week you see another one. And then last week, of course, there's an announcement of 1.2 billion passwords have been stolen. My wife asked me, so what do we do? I'm just going to publish my passwords and just on the web. I said, well, they already have them. You don't need to. So what does it mean? I don't know. But let's talk about this another second. All we just talked about there was theft, right? So in 2002, cybersecurity was, bad employees stealing your data or trying to steal some money. Some hackers trying to steal a little bit of money. And today, it is state-sponsored, and it is large organized crime. I'm talking big organized crime. I had dinner with 2 very, very senior U.S. government officials, both household names that you would recognize, who told me that, I've forgotten if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, the 2 biggest cyber organized crime organizations in the world recently merged, just like a corporation. They actually merged and decided to, look, let's stop competing with each other. Let's put our forces together and go after it. So you have large, well-funded businesses that are all attacking us this way, and you have state-sponsored. And by the way, on the state-sponsored part, so far the denial of services that so many of you deal with, and so many of the attacks that, well, I'd probably say all of you deal with, the attacks you've suffered have been, in the way I would characterize it, as war games. On state-sponsored. It's just testing. It's flying close to the border and pulling back. It's those sort of war games. So far, nobody's actually hit the button and launched a cyber war. And I'll talk in a moment about the future, profound things can happen if that button ever gets hit and the cyber war actually happens, and all of our planning could go out the window and whole new plannings could take place. We weren't talking about that in 2002. So here's this now much more educated, smart, confident, old CEO standing up here today at the CIO conference, thinking forward 12 more years. What's going to happen in 12 years? So let's just jump out here and look for a second. I'm going to, there's a lot of reports, I'm sure you all get them, they're different, PwC has them, there's a lot of great documents out there that talk about the disruptive technologies, and rather than try to do a mashup, I just took the one that Abhijit and James did at McKinsey and took a quick flash look at them. So here's the short list. Mobile internet, automation of knowledge workers, Internet of Things, cloud, advanced robotics, autonomous vehicles, next-gen genomics, energy, 3D, advanced materials, advanced oil and gas exploration, renewable energy. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I am going to talk about a few of them. Mobile internet, I'm not going to talk about at all because everybody here is all over it. It's in your mind, it's all the time, it's what you're talking about. It's how we're all going to do business. Everybody knows that 80% of all internet transactions and all internet connections will be mobile within the next decade, 80%. Everything is going that way. We just don't know what mobile is yet, right? We don't know what mobile is. It certainly doesn't just mean your iPhone and your Galaxy. It means a whole set of devices, pervasive computing that hasn't been invented yet, and that it's all going to just continue to wash over us. We know that cloud technology is going to continue to be a front and center in all of our discussions. Amazon today, I believe it's every day, onboards enough new capacity to host a typical $5 billion enterprise. But when we talked earlier about the outsourcing, Rackspace announced last week they're exiting the infrastructure as a service business. They're getting out of it because they can't make any money. The price model isn't working for them, and they were at it hard. It's really interesting. We're entering now chapter 2 of this kind of cloud infrastructure as a service business. What's going to happen with it? Is Amazon taking over the world? My experience, rarely does anybody really take over the world because too many antibodies kick in and too many other business models start to evolve around it. But is it going to be a concentration of just 2 or 3 people, or is it going to morph into something else, which is a more likely scenario in my opinion? Automation of knowledge workers. There are about 230 million people in this McKinsey study identified who today think they are safe from automation. But in fact, if you look at Sloan Kettering in New York, cancer research, they're using the IBM Watson supercomputer to look at enormous amounts of big data, enormous amounts of data, and make the best course recommendation of how to treat the patient using gigantic volumes of analytics. And so all of a sudden, these physicians who would sit down and read the patient, and I'm sure still have the final word and say on it, are finding themselves potentially automating that. Many, many people who today think they are in a judgment role, that they are making real-time decisions with fuzzy information, and that they have to apply human judgment, are wrong. In fact, this study estimates 140 million people in the next 10 years who today think of themselves as not having jobs that are not automatable are wrong. Now, in case you don't know, CEOs, we all have a secret meeting once a year in Aspen to make sure it doesn't happen to us. That's the most important thing. Okay. This one. Now, this one is wacky. We all talk about it. This is a big, big deal. Autonomous vehicles is a big, big deal. In fact, just yesterday, as I was flying up here, I saw that Forbes had an article about this as well. So let's talk about autonomous vehicles for a second. There's $200 billion of premiums every year paid for automobile insurance. The estimates are that autonomous vehicles will have a 90% reduction in collisions that will equate to a 90% reduction in premiums. You're talking about an industry that today is collecting $200 billion going to $20 billion potentially. You're talking about 1.2 billion less deaths every year. And that just begins the discussion. By the way, this has been approved now in London to start going real time with it. Right? You've all read about Uber and Lyft and that great fight that's going on between those companies with these giant market caps that have disaggregated the taxis. You've seen the Paris taxis all go on strike, but they go on strike for everything, but they go on strike and over trying to stop it. You've seen Chicago come up against it, some other cities in the U.S. going for it, and yet it's an unstoppable force, right, this concept of it. But what if when you got on your device and you said, I need a car, it showed up at a prearranged time with no driver? Like, what if that happened every morning to take you to work? And what if that happened every night to take you home? And what if you don't need garages? And what if you don't need parking garages? And what if that car's all electric? And what if the government gets involved to support it being all electric because of the economic impact and the climate impact? And all of a sudden now you have a few mega parking stations that the car parks itself and recharges, and you schedule, and you also have certain cars that stay in close loops for urgent. I've got to go pick up my kid at school. Bam, hit the button, the car's there within 5 minutes, and you're off. Right? I have a hard time figuring out why that's not going to happen instead of why it is going to happen. I have a hard time imagining that we're going to be going to the dealership and picking out that beautiful black sports car that I really want. Uh, but our kids, when Mary Fran's granddaughter or daughter or whatever it was, Mary Fran, what is she? Granddaughter. Almost, whew. Um, the, when she grows up, I'm not sure she's going to have a love affair with her car. In fact, there's a lot of not a lot, but there's some real research to suggest that these young people will not have love affairs with cars. That cars is going to fade out as something that you care about and is a piece of you. It'll be art, it'll be fun, it'll be rich people will collect them and all that fun stuff will happen. But why? If you think about the economic impact, driving everybody where you don't pay car insurance, where the accidents drop dramatically, and that's just picking up cars, and that doesn't move into a whole set of related technologies once all this stuff is connected. And I'm not going to talk about Internet of Things much other than just give you one quick story. We're working right now with a multi-billion-dollar enterprise where I met when they asked us to visit with them about the Internet of Things because they actually are in multiple businesses. One of them is the real estate industry, buildings. And we're working with them right now on the creation of a configuration management database, a CMDB, with 450 million different objects discovered and maintained to start with that include elevators, thermostats, lighting systems, doors open and closed, what's in stocking, what's in the cafeteria for their employees, for their customers, delivering for them a whole set of new things they can charge money for to their customers, kind of a building as a service kind of a model for them. And the meeting I had was not with the CIO. He was in the room. It was the CEO of one of the largest companies in the world who requested the meeting. And we sat in the room with him and his finance chief and his CIO to talk about this. That's a big deal. Whenever you're meeting with the CEO of Fortune 500 companies and their CIOs to talk about this. And we're going to essentially begin to digitize everything. And then if you take those two and you put it together and you move into advanced robotics, then why does it matter where the labor pool is? What happens to the labor arbitrage? Is it really relevant that you have big labor arbitrage? Does the 1.2 million people today in Shenzhen making the iPhones and iPads, how many people do you need if the machines are making them? And then why do those machines need to be in China? Why can't they be in Mississippi? Why can't they be in Dallas? Why can't they be in Pennsylvania? And then, this is one that's a little dicey, but airline pilots. A Dreamliner today can take off, land, pick you up, put you at the gate with nobody in it. The FAA is about to upgrade their systems that'll have a lot more, for one thing, will make them a lot more secure and give you more capabilities in terms of how the radios and the systems evolve. And look, I do not intend on being on any of those early flights without any pilots. By the way, I am a pilot, just for the record. Not a very good one, by the way, so I wouldn't fly with me, but make too many mistakes. But nonetheless, the drones and what's happening with that is a big deal. Yesterday, Amazon made progress in their drone program for their Prime delivery system, probably delivering their items to their distribution centers instead of your house. So these are just a few of the things. 3D printing, $30,000 to print a wrench off in the space shuttle, or $30 million to bring it to them. Same thing applies to offshore oil rigs. Same thing, supply chain can get totally redesigned as a result of the 3D printing. Yes, in the last 90 days, there's been 3 major press releases about giant battery advances. One of them says that a Tesla can now go 300 miles without a recharge, and that there's no new energy heat. The batteries don't vary in heat depending on usage, which drives the cooling systems out of the cars and makes it more efficient and safer and less pollution, by the way. And that's just one. There's 3 other announcements. Advanced materials. Nanotubes today, I think, is about $1,000 a gram. Within 10 years, it's going to be $50 a gram. What happens when you have this almost perfect material, electrically conductive material, lightweight, strong to chemicals, to pharmaceuticals, to everything? So, 2012, we talked about the things we were worried about, and it turns out a whole bunch of big things happened that changed what we worried about. 2014, we've got our list of the things we're worried about, big data analytics, all the stuff we're talking about. what's not on the list? What are the items that go in these green boxes that will end up being what really we spend a lot of time on in the years ahead? We don't know what they are. But let me just give you a couple that are scary. If the red button gets hit on cyber war and they knock the systems down and they specifically target the big cloud providers, the public cloud providers, and if those people are not able to keep those systems up, you will see a move back to your own data centers. If terrorism, as it happened in 2001, happens again, and it happens more aggressively, and let's say in multiple locations, you'll see a de-urbanization. You'll see workforces move out of the big cities. They'll spread out. All of us will be focused on how am I going to really do collaborative computing, because people aren't going to come in. The same thing applies to viruses, the Ebola kind of a thing. If you take airborne version of that, one of these days, a virus is going to be airborne. It's going to be a big deal. And when it does, I'm not going to the office. Right? So what happens to IT in that environment? The answer is you're going to be working from wherever you are with your towels under your doors. Right? And so those are the kind of black swan events that we don't plan for. So the conclusion to all of this is that, by the way, I'll be back in 2026. By the way, I really hope I don't need glasses and that they have some kind of cure for baldness by then. But I don't. Actually, my father and nobody in my family is bald, so I'm hoping that doesn't just suddenly happen to me for no apparent reason, but we'll see. But when I come back in 2026, tongue-in-cheek, we need to be talking of what will we know? The answer is many of the things we just talked about are going to change the way we work. Many of the things we just talked about are going to impact all that we do and how we do it. It is absolute truth. We can plan on it. That's fun. Let's go do it. But what we know is you are going to be responsible for whatever it is. You're going to have the responsibility to have a command and control system, a layer for command and control, a layer for governance, a layer for change. You're going to have a service environment, a request environment. You're going to have a provisioning environment. You're going to have a security environment, authentication. You're going to have an accounting environment. You're going to have these command and control system, a layer that controls the whole thing for you. That you're going to have to do. And right now as you sit here, you're going to be plugging infrastructure and application architecture in that you have no idea what it's going to be. You know that. So I would propose to you that the command and control layer is almost as strategic as anything you're working on right now. That you have to determine how are you going to build a system that is not hardwired, that delivers all those capabilities that allows you to plug, play, almost like an OS, plug and play for enterprise. And it's a whole management system that will deliver that and that you will be responsible for. So that's what we enjoy, by the way, not to be self-serving, but this is all we talk about at BMC. We talk about this all day long, is how do we build that environment to help you be prepared for that. Listen, it was a real honor. Thank you very much, Mary Fran. Really appreciate you allowing me to participate in your event. I look forward to talking with many of you. By the way, to all my customers out there, I saw some of you old friends. Hi, thank you very much. Aren't customers? Let's talk afterwards. Thank you very much.
Very good idea.